So with all the confusion surrounding tariffs and the resulting stock market volatility, I thought it might be helpful to create a short video to clarify some of the media's misinformation and disinformation related to the recent tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. Because I think the stock market volatility is going to be with us for a while. There's a reason Trump laid out his tariff regime very early in his term. It's because he knows it's going to take some time to negotiate with all of our trading partners, and he wants the dust settled before the November 2026 midterm elections. That's not being cynical, that's just the way American politics work. And as usual, the media isn't helping things. Left-leaning media is portraying the tariff policy as the posturing of a narcissist whose abuse of power serves only to generate chaos and alienate our friends and sink our retirement accounts. Right-leaning media is characterizing it as a justifiable retaliation for trading abuses perpetrated against the United States, and that the income from the tariffs will ultimately generate revenue for tax cuts, Social Security, and Medicare funding shortages. There's probably some truth to both narratives, but they both miss the point, and I'm hoping after watching this video, you'll have a much better understanding of the real purpose for the tariffs, and why this should not be a partisan issue. So what's really going on? Is there a method to this madness? What is the point of imposing tariffs on our closest allies? Does Trump not care about the chaos occurring in the stock market? Is he not aware of the potential to generate inflation or create a recession? Or does he actually have a plan? Well, yes, there is a plan, a much broader plan, but the narratives being played out in mainstream media are sidestepping the existence of that broader plan. Why, you ask? Well, I think the most generous explanation is that the topic is just a little too deep in the weeds to attract the attention of viewers. And if I'm being a little less generous, then another explanation might be that the media is exploiting the complexity of the topic to spin a conclusion more in line with its agenda. Whatever that may be. I'm going to lay out the Trump trade policy here and let you decide if it's being fairly portrayed. First of all, I think it's worth mentioning that this new trade policy isn't a scheme cooked up by a cabal of supervillain billionaires. President Trump's role aside, there are two primary architects: Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Dr. Stephen Moran. Let's first quickly go over the background of these two monetary policy experts. It's no accident that Trump selected Scott Bessent for the Treasury Secretary position. And I know it's popular for some to assume that we shouldn't trust the wealthy to represent average Americans. And yes, Bessent is a very wealthy guy. Not quite billionaire status, but very wealthy, as you would expect of someone with his background. Bessent is a former Yale University professor of economic history. And in the early 90s, Bessent worked under George Soros. Yeah, that George Soros. Bessent and Soros played a significant role in forcing the UK to restructure its monetary policy. So I think it's safe to say that Scott Bessent is a currency expert. Trump is now hoping Bessent can bring that expertise to help restructure global monetary policy. Dr. Stephen Moran earned his master's and PhD in economics from Harvard University. He served as an advisor of economic policy for the Department of the Treasury from 2020 to 2021 and was an adjunct professor at the Manhattan Institute. At Scott Bessent's recommendation, Trump selected Dr. Stephen Moran to chair the Council of Economic Advisors. And on March 12th, he was confirmed by the Senate for that position by a vote of 53 to 46. Dr. Moran was unanimously approved on March 25th for that position by the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. I've attached his now infamous essay on reshaping the order of global trade. He authored that paper in November of 2024, and it's what formed the basis for Bessent's recommendation that he be selected for the position. I think it's important to understand that his essay is not a blueprint for the Trump administration. In fact, Dr. Moran made a point to warn others that it would be a mistake to view it as such. The essay does, however, provide insight into the mindset of Trump's top economic advisor. And it's pretty clear that the current policy mirrors the basic strategy within the essay. So, if you want to dive into the details of what motivated Trump's big, beautiful trading policy, his words not mine, then you'll want to read Dr. Moran's essay. But be warned, this is PhD level economics, and it's not for the easily intimidated. That's why I'm trying to distill that information for you in this video. Now, bear with me because in a few minutes this will all make sense, and you won't need a PhD in economics. So I call Trump's new trade policy Bretton Woods 2.0 because it so closely mirrors the goals of the original Bretton Woods Agreement. If you watched my video on the history of globalization, I described how the agreement at Bretton Woods laid out the framework for an international trading system that paved the way for what we now call globalization. And just to refresh your memory, at the close of World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement was structured to create a trading environment using the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Now, what that means is, if a country wanted to trade internationally under the agreement, then it would have to trade in US dollars. So, in short, we agreed to open our markets to European exports in exchange for an agreement that trading partners would abide by a US-led system for international security. Because after World War II, it was all about preventing a rising Joseph Stalin from becoming the next Hitler. Joseph Stalin was uniquely brutal. Some even suggest he made Hitler look like a choir boy. We didn't want our boys getting slaughtered again because of Western European complacency. And the war had left Western Europe in shambles with no means of defending itself from the ambitions of a Stalin-led USSR. So it wasn't too difficult to convince Europeans that the security umbrella we promised to provide was in their best interest. But times have changed. Now it's China in the crosshairs, and Europe is financially capable of funding for its own defense, whether it be for their own military buildup or that of the US. But they've already proven unwilling to comply with their financial commitments to NATO. And the Nord Stream pipeline, both 1 and 2, proved that they're unwilling even to abide by the spirit of the NATO relationship. Trump is correct in describing how the United States has been getting the raw end of the deal, but I'm not so sure it's as nefarious as he suggests, because one of the natural byproducts of being the world's reserve currency is that it inflates the dollar's value over time. Now here's where things start to get a little bit complicated. There are many advantages to the privilege of maintaining the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. But there are some disadvantages that are particularly problematic. When the US imports more than we export, it creates a trade deficit. In a trade deficit environment, we buy more goods from other countries than we sell to them. So more dollars are transferred out of the United States than are brought into the United States. It's estimated that right now there is approximately 7 trillion US dollars currently being held in reserve by other countries. And that has the effect of propping up the value of the dollar. Now, propping up the US dollar has a very negative impact on our capacity to export American goods abroad, because they become too expensive to compete on the global market. It's what's called the Triffin dilemma, a name that was coined after the impact was predicted in 1959 by Belgian-American economist Robert Triffin. Now that's an oversimplified explanation, but it describes the basis for our current trade policy. In other words, there is a method to what appears as madness, and there is a much broader plan in play than the narrative that Trump is just arbitrarily imposing tariffs on the rest of the world. The tariffs are merely designed to bring trading partners to the negotiating table. Stephen Moran said as much, right here.
If the dollar were able to weaken to equilibrate trade, then we wouldn't have a lot of the, to balance trade deficits, then we wouldn't have a lot of the problems that tariffs and other policies are designed to address, because U.S. exports would be more competitive on the global stage and we wouldn't be as cheated by other countries.
It's my guess that the blanket 10% tariff on all trading partners is specifically designed to offset the Triffin dilemma. The broader strategy is about restructuring international trade in a way that allows the U.S. to retain the dollar as the world's reserve currency without incurring the negative impact of propping up its value. If we have any hope of rebuilding our manufacturing capacity, then this restructuring will be invaluable to that process. Dr. Moran clearly stated in a recent interview that the tariffs were only intended to generate sufficient negotiating leverage. So the objective should be clear. Tariffs are only the first step in a negotiation process to restructure our reserve currency status. And if we're using Stephen Moran's essay as a guide, then the restructuring process also requires our trading partners to exchange their $7 trillion in U.S. treasuries for 100-year zero coupon bonds and some other esoteric monetary requirements. We don't need to get into all of that, because if you followed me this far, then you get the gist of it. It's not about tariffs. It's about reserve currency policy. Or more to the point, it's about creating an environment that levels the currency playing field so that the United States can compete fairly with the rest of the world and regain our capacity to manufacture at a level that doesn't put our national security at risk. And speaking of national security, just to put our defense capability into context, China has a shipbuilding capacity that is not 2 or 3 times larger than that of the US. They have a shipbuilding capacity that is 230 times our capacity. And they already have the world's largest navy. So it would be a mistake to forget that national security plays a very important part in this broader plan to reindustrialize the United States. And that's why this should not be a partisan issue. It's an attempt to lay the foundation for a fair system of international trade that allows the US to provide a security umbrella, not just to protect our interests, but also those of our neighbors and allies. At least that's the plan. We'll soon find out if it works.